Today we're going to be talking about what to do with the opposition to your argument. Remember, as we talked about, when we are choosing the audience to consider for our argument essay, the primary group that we're working with are the people who are neutral and then the people who disagree with us. So if we're aiming at the people who already disagree with what we're trying to argue, then we really have to make sure that we deal with their opposition. We take that into account and we actually do something to help show them why our side is better. If we ignore the opposition, if we don't bring up why people would disagree with us, we leave a huge hole in our argument that our reader is going to see and then use that to disregard the argument that we're making, even if it's very well done. So how do we deal with the opposition? Well, there's two ways. One is simply to have a strong argument to begin with. The stronger your argument is that leaves as little holes as possible, then that's going to make your argument that much stronger and make your opposition less serious. But the other component is what we call counter-argument. Okay, and this is when you deal with the opposition head on. Now think of that word counter-argument and that prefix, counter. Think about some other words that have the prefix counter. Some that you might come up with are counter-attack, counter-clockwise, some other words like that. Now in all of these, what does counter mean? Yes, it means going against. So an attack is when you or the other person, initiates an attack of some sort, like in a battle. Whereas a counterattack is responding to that. Okay, even though it's still an attack, it's coming back in relation to something else. Same thing with counterclockwise, it's the opposite of clockwise. So a counter argument is when you are disproving your opposition. Okay, so think about it like this. An argument is when you prove your side to be right. Counter-argument is when you prove the opposition wrong. Now you may look at that and say, well, that's the same thing. Well, yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? The whole idea here is that both counter-argument and argument are trying to show why your thesis is the best side. Okay, it's kind of a heads I win, tails you lose situation. So how do we do counter-argument? Well, part of what you do for counter-argument you did in your antithesis essay, where you thought about the opposition, what exactly people would say to disprove you. But now we have to really think about how we deal with it, because it's not enough to simply say it's wrong. We have to actually prove that it's wrong. Okay, and there's a great three-step process that's going to help you do this. Okay, and that is to acknowledge, concede, and refute. Okay, but I'm going to walk you through each of these steps right now. So first, let's use that as an example, this thesis. Extra taxes on junk food like soda should not be implemented. Okay? Now that's clearly an arguable statement. There are people who think they should be implemented, and there are some communities who have implemented them. So this is absolutely a real world issue. Okay, but let's say my thesis, what I want to argue is that these extra taxes on junk food should not be used. Okay? So then I have to think about, well, why would somebody disagree with that? Okay? So that's the first step, acknowledging the opposition, or stating what the opposition is. Now when I do this, it's essential that I be accurate. I have to truthfully say what the opposition is, and I have to be fair. Because if I unfairly represent the opposition in a way that's offensive to the people who hold those beliefs, well, they're going to be turned off from my essay. Because remember, the people who disagree are my target audience. Okay? So in this thesis, if I was to say something like, the people who think extra taxes on junk food should be implemented are Nazis who just think that the government should do everything to control our lives and they're evil. Well, yeah, that's not a very fair representation of why people would think this is a good idea. And saying that would, of course, turn those people off. It's pretty incendiary and alienating. Okay? So instead, we need to think about, well, how could we say this? Should we say the sentence, extra taxes on junk food like soda should be implemented? Well, it's on the right track, but think about this. If my thesis is that they should not be implemented, then a paragraph in my essay says that they should be implemented, my reader will rightfully be very confused and say, well, wait a minute, I thought you said the opposite was true. Okay? That's because I'm not attributing this to somebody else. I'm making it seem like this is what I believe, which is not true. That's not the point of counterargument. So instead, a better acknowledgement would start with something like some believe, or there are those who say, people think, and it doesn't even have to be that general. Sometimes I'm attributing it to a specific author from a source, which is excellent. In that case, I could say something like Johnson says. Okay? But this is what an acknowledgement would look like. Some believe extra taxes on junk food should be implemented because it will curb unhealthy behavior, helping the obesity epidemic. That's a fair representation. That is absolutely what people in favor of these taxes believe. So it's accurate and fair. I'm not alienating anyone. Okay, so that's the first start, or the first part to my counterargument. Now the next piece is to concede. Okay, concede means to give up, essentially, or to agree with the opposition in some way. And the way this works is that it shows open-mindedness. It shows that, yeah, I can even see that people who disagree with me are right in some regards. Okay? And it builds bridges with that opposition, metaphorically. It shows them that, you know what, we're kind of on similar grounds. We have similar goals. It's just that we disagree on how to get there. Okay? Now, you don't necessarily concede every single time you counter-argue, but it's a great idea to do so. Okay? And you should really try as often as possible. Because like I said, it builds that connection with your reader, which after all, audience consideration is one of the most important things we do in our writing. Okay? So that would be something like this, following the acknowledgement we already had. These people are right that obesity is a major problem in this country. And unhealthy foods like soda and other junk food absolutely contribute to the health crisis. They are also correct that something should be done to encourage healthier eating habits. Now notice I did not give up the whole argument. I didn't say, yeah, they're right, do the taxes. That would be counterproductive to my own thesis. But what I did say is, you know what? They're right that obesity is a problem. Can't disagree with that. And they're also right that something needs to be done. I can agree with all of this and still not agree with their solution. But if we can agree on what the problem is and that something should be done, that's a great way to connect with our reader in a meaningful, open-minded way. Okay? But if we stop here, and sometimes students do this and it really hurts their essay, if you stop here, then all you're doing is saying why the other side is right. You got to always bring it back to why your side is right. Okay? And that's why the last step is to refute or disprove. Another word for this is rebuttal. This is when you disprove the opposition logically. You don't simply say, they're wrong. That's not going to convince anybody. Once again, rightfully so. It shouldn't convince anybody. Just like if they said you're wrong, that shouldn't be all that convincing. But we disprove it with logic, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. And the refuting, this is when it brings the whole counter-argument back to your thesis. Okay, it's supporting the thesis overall. That's the whole point, remember. Okay, so let's just look back at what I already have. I've said why people believe taxes on junk food should be implemented. I've agreed to what is true about that. But then here's when I refute it. Okay. However, and that transition is a great thing. It shows that I'm shifting from one thing to a contrasting element. Okay, so however, although, things like that. However, taxes are not the way to do this. As tobacco shows, people will still partake in extremely expensive habits regardless of higher taxes. Instead, the tax subsidy system, which gives some businesses extra money to grow certain foods, should be allocated differently to encourage cheaper prices for healthy food. If healthy food is more affordable, more people will be able to make the healthy choices they may not be able to afford now. So look at that. I logically refuted the point about needing to do something to curb obesity, because I basically said, you're right, but taxes are not the way to do it. They don't work. Instead, let's do something else. So I'm showing why their solution won't work, and I'm offering a better solution in its place. That's a great technique for refuting. Now, of course, this is not complete. This is just a small sample. I don't have any cited evidence. I would need to do that. And there are some things I would explain further. But this is a good example of the structure of counterargument. Okay? Now, how counterargument will fit into the structure of your essay? Well, there are a few choices. Everybody needs to have at least some counterargument in their essay. Okay, and if you look at the sample essay at the end of chapter 5 of the Quick Access Compact, it has a great example of an essay that uses counterargument. You can do it first within a body paragraph after the reason. So let's say you have a reason that was about the taxes and about curbing obesity. You could then follow it up with this one talking about why the taxes should be used. Okay, but sometimes our counterargument is something like the sample I just gave you where, well, it probably wouldn't fit into somebody else's paragraph. It's its own paragraph, and it can do that. It can be in its own body paragraph by itself. We'll talk more about this when the time comes to start drafting the argument essay, but just something to keep in mind that counterargument can be used within a paragraph, as its own paragraph, or a combination of the two. As long as you have it in there, though, as long as you're dealing with the opposition, that's really going to help your own argument take shape. It's going to make sure that the opposition feels like you have answered their concerns, and in general just makes you much more likely to actually convince your reader to agree with you.